Hello there everyone. So, I did give a warning at the end of the last video that we had found something rather profound on a trip near Tanamar. Again, to put it simply, Sciency detected some sort of dimensional anomaly on a planet not far from there, and as we investigated, we found a long-form transmission from some unknown world outside of our view. It took us a while to receive and then translate this entire transmission, but we did it! And what we got from it, well, is a message. Something transmitted into the ether from one soul. So here, for all of you, we will now play back that translated transmission. I am Tahrgun Vexcavan, a scientist and medical researcher of the Lamorn civilization. My people and myself are now inside Chrono Tower, awaiting a time for the Chosen One to appear before us to save us. Or at least, that is the hope of our greatest priest, Chatoya. I myself am uncertain and skeptical, but it is the only hope we have left. Though I have left my thoughts elsewhere, it is here, now, that I feel I must leave my own recount of our kind and how we have gotten to where we are now. Let me then give you the history of our people, not just as it is known by many, but how it is known to me, of my own life, and of the things I have seen and witnessed that others have not. We, the Lamorn, have always been a part of Vuros, as it is our home, and has served as the base for our ancient era, the very beginning of our entire civilization. Though I will admit that I do not know specifically where we came from on this world, nor does anyone else, I do know that the earliest pages of our history comes in our arrival to the land of Fury Green, a dense jungle land that served at one time as the only truly vibrant part of our homeworld of Vuros. The planet has always been a harsh environment, where life is barely able to eke out an existence amidst the many different harsh terrains out there. And for many of us, the beasts that dwelled there could be fierce, but still far gentler than what else was out beyond the jungle. While we Lamorn normally are of one form and look, some of us, the priests of our race, are born with special psychic crystals embedded into their forms, and these crystals allow them to communicate and interact with the world in ways that others like myself cannot naturally. It was here that the very first priest of this class, Thasar, would come across the entity that would truly usher in this first great age for the Lamorn, for it was he that interacted with the entity we call the Sacred Tree. The entity was massive even in those times, and from what I have gathered, it has only grown increasingly so over time, but what made it so special is that it had a special power and essence to it. A mind, you could say. Inside of it, it held psychic power the likes of which the Lamorn could scarcely have imagined then, and has still proven unmatched in, and with it, our people formed religion for the first time, all around the sacred tree and what it could offer. Close to it, Thasar and the Lamorn of that time built the Temple of Memory in its honor and beneath its branches, for the sacred tree had the power to retain the minds and memories of all beings that communed with it directly, their memory forever made a part of its form as it absorbed mental energy from them. Visitors to the sacred tree would be asked to cleanse themselves in the water of a river that runs through the land of Fury Green, the water symbolically cleansing them of transgressions, so they too may be remembered by the sacred tree, and so they too may remember all the Lamorn that had come and gone under its care and watch. I am not exactly what many would call a religious man here, to be frank. The seeming importance of this river and its waters has always made me feel a bit awkward, but I suppose the symbolism to be had is that only minds willing to truly accept the essence of the sacred tree could be worthy of taking part in it and becoming a part of it. No evil thoughts to keep it pure, I suppose. I cannot argue against the might the tree does indeed possess at the very least. I suppose that I never felt it as purely as others because of my upbringing and my work and my research, but I am getting ahead of myself there. In this time, as the Lamorn flourished, they would also look out past the lands of Fury Green to see what more may be out there, outside our direct view, and what we saw at first made us concerned for our safety and our time in the jungle. We first came across a vast land we called Soul Valley, a rolling expanse of fields that seemed to be of a peaceful nature. To one end of it, the Lamorn found a place where a terrible, eternal thunderstorm seemed to blanket the land, and with great difficulty, a trio of outpost towers were built there as a way to keep watch over the storm and to hope and pray that it would stay put, for the lightning there was so incredibly harsh that many feared that its presence anywhere else would be a disaster to others. In time, this land, built with at least one tower tunneled into solid bedrock at the base of the landscape, would come to be called the Volt Forge. On the other end of the planet laterally, there was a frozen expanse of terrain in chilly, icy mountain peaks, and though harsh, we too persevered there and found a spot where the land was relatively flatter and possible to build upon. There, we found something, I think. Truth be told, this is a part of our history now that not even Chitoya knows much about concretely. At some point or another, there was a temple complex there. Was being the operative word. The little that I have seen with my own eyes is but rubble now, with barely anything left, but the sheer age of what is there tells me it had to have been built at the same time as the Temple of Memory, and I do believe that the prominent Lamorn priest named Kavanda had built it, though for what reason I was not initially certain of. But if I had to take a guess in my own thoughts, because of the way the ruins seem to match the motifs we see in the Temple of Memory, especially the altar where Lamorn priests would offer tribute and psychic power to the sacred tree, hesitantly, I think there may have been a twin there at some point, some sort of other grand tree that had found a way to find a life even in the frozen expanse of this land, which we have come to call the Ice Belt. I am aware that Chitoya knows how the offspring of the sacred tree, the memory fruit, exists and works, and that knowledge had to come from somewhere. It is my personal belief then that the Lamorn of that era must have managed to acquire one and planted it in the Ice Belt to try and terraform it, to make another home for us. And for a time, it seems that worshippers there too made themselves a home. As a whole here, for much of its duration, the Lamorn of the ancient era were able to live in peace and harmony with the land. Sadly though, it does not seem that this was all meant to last. The records of the time between this era of our civilization and that of others is fuzzy at best, and I believe that is because of a terrible event that would eventually befall our people, one that is almost entirely forgotten. You see, there is but one account of some sort of flaming stone falling from the sky within some part of Fury Green. A stone that, after crashing into our world, seemed to leak a poison that killed much of the life around it. It was there, though, that this poison seemed to mutate and transform a simple carnivorous plant into a much larger and more powerful entity. A plant that, like the sacred tree, seemed to have the capacity to think for its own, a mind and soul being formed in it. In time, the priest Thessar would find and commune with this plant, and came to call it Carvex. Carvex would be worshipped and honored by the Lamorn of Fury Green, and eventually they would convince the creature to leave the place where it had been rooted, and allow it so to be transported to the Temple of Memory, where it would become not just a trusted ally and friend, and a presider over the greatest of honors, looking over and being the officiator for Lamorn funeral services in the temple, but would come to be called a guardian. This is a title that is not to be scoffed at, for this role was only ever given to allied and trusted entities of not just great power, but those that the Lamorn would form peaceful connections and relationships with. More like Carvex would eventually come to exist, but I bring this up for an important reason, as it seems that, from my own research, these guardians were linked to one another by one thing: potent mutations originating from exposure to the same type of poison as it was put. It feels like it was a mutagen of some sort, and if this is a consistent factor across all known guardians, then to me, the truth is very clear. I believe that the fiery stone that rained down onto Fury Green was not alone. I believe, in fact, that it was but a piece of something much larger, something that must have broken up into several objects as it entered into the atmosphere of our world, the fragments impacting different places and spreading this poison in turn. While some, such as those that must have impacted closer to the Volt Forge, went seemingly unseen, I am almost certain now that one such fragment must have hit part of the ancient temple complex in the Ice Belt, which is why most of it was destroyed, and the impact must have truly been severe, for it seemingly killed all of the Lamorn stationed there and shattered most of the complex into rubble so drastically that, when we would come to build our medical research center there in more recent times, we built it over most of it without even knowing it. In turn, this impact must have also killed the tree that may have been present there, for there is no other trace of it present except what remains Tritoya was able to at least salvage when he repaired part of the complex in my time. But there is far more, because it seems that if any part of this event is truly preserved in ancient lore, it is likely in the existence of a prophecy. Not to get ahead of myself again, but Tritoya and other priests spoke of looking into a prophecy of this land more than once. But if they had to say it in that way, are they not suggesting that there was a first prophecy they simply did not tell most about? I hypothesize that there indeed must have been Lamorn that witnessed this impact event and saw a greater disaster coming their way in a prophecy then. They likely would have convened and put together a prophecy for how it all would end, for who would be there to help stop the spread of this poison. To them, this would have credence laid to it, and in their eyes, the one that was meant to be their chosen one then was one who could take the powers of the priests, which specifically I hypothesize is their control over the elements known to the Lamorn, namely the power of fire, ice, and electricity, all discovered by Lamorn priests over time in that order, which the chosen one would have used then to fight back against the poison and any and all monsters that came from it, trying to destroy what we had. The symbolism is quite direct there. 3 elements, 3 lands known to the Lamorn at that time aside from Sol Valley. Makes sense to me, right? I know many monuments were made in that time to truly reflect this. So, what then became of this era? What became of this first great prophecy? I have absolutely no idea whatsoever. Or at least, I really didn't at first. It seemed that while they must have predicted the worst, in the end, the worst never came to be. The threat never appeared to them in the apocalyptic fashion that they expected. The worst that did happen is that Sol Valley, once a vast grassy plain, was scorched beyond recognition by the series of impacts, transformed into a barren desert as sand covered it, formed from the scorching pulverization of rock over the vast landscape. And to the Lamorn of our ancient era, the damage was immense, seemingly impossible to fathom. For a time then, our people came to once again reside solely in Fury Green. The remains of our kind barely left standing after this impact series nearly destroyed us. I cannot say entirely for certain how long it took for our people to recover, but I know that Thessar, at the very least, managed to survive and weather the worst of it. But as centuries would tick by, and he would somehow still manage to live on, in time he too would grow old, and his leadership was what held much of us together. We knew that if we were to survive, we needed to find a way to find other lands to colonize and spread our culture through, for the jungle could only support a population for so long. However, eventually, something would change for our people, and in ways that we could scarcely ever imagine. For the next era of our existence would come not from some sort of natural event or disaster, but from the advancement of the one thing my entire life has been built upon: technology. One Lamorn, using the power of their psychic minds, would eventually come to create something special and unique, never seen before. Carved originally out of stone and wood, and infused with the power of priestly psychic energy, a craft of 2 feet, rounded, and able to rotate under the will of the user's mind, would be made, and it would allow Lamorn of any kind to ride across the ground at extreme speeds we could never reach on our own. And more importantly, though it could not travel across uneven or truly rugged terrain, when the ground was at least fairly flat, such as the sandy land of Sol Valley, it could travel across vast distances in record time, and through its creator, even had a primitive energy weapon system installed that could attack and fight off any beasts that would dare to attack their rider. This vehicle would come to be called Viola, and with its creation, it ushered in the next part of our time on Vuros, our machine era. With the Viola created, the window to technological evolution would be swung wide open, and we would finally begin to grow and flourish beyond any scope that could have been imagined before. The outpost in Voltforge underwent a process of industrialization, slowly being converted at least partially into a factory for these vehicles, as well as, in further time, a place where they could be stored and shown to others, and where Lamorn could learn to ride them and use the vehicles to the utmost. With these vehicles, we began to finally cross even farther outwards into Soul Valley than ever before. It was in this time that we discovered the Magdrada volcano, a fearsome force of nature that terrified many and was mostly inhospitable, but nonetheless, we found and communed with entities there just the same, with the Tsar, even in his old age, making peace with the creature that lived in the volcano's lava lake, one that called itself Finoros. We were able to fully explore the lands of the Ice Belt safely once more as well, where the priest also met and communed with a beast that called itself Keratos. And even back at the Volt Forge, when it became clear that the Lamorn could not safely live in the forge full time, we built machines that automated the entire process of Viola production, who in turn were not just powered by an energy gathering system that could function entirely on its own, using the electricity in the ever-present thunderstorm to gather power to a seemingly endless degree, but commanded by a being we made of both flesh and machine, an artificial intelligence that we called Zelios. It was given the simple task of acting in the interest of the happiness of the Lamorn, and given free rein to do whatever it saw fit to achieve that goal. At the same time, we also created the Cybots, machines that could be powered through psychic energy alone, and served mainly as assistants and guides for the Lamorn that needed their assistance in everyday life. As we progressed, however, it became clear to us that the resources that we did have available to us at this time was simply not going to be enough to sustain our growth. And so, as we developed newer technologies that could rely on other forms of power that could be sourced to an infinite degree without resource depletion, in an untouched corner of Soul Valley, we also began to mine through the ground beneath us to find more resources, if any could be found. Deep below the surface then, we would begin to tunnel, at first merely with the help of manual labor, but eventually with the power of massive drilling machines. There we would discover a monster that would become the fifth and final guardian of Lamorn, a great beast called Gravanax, and in communing with it, we discovered that, in its tunneling and feeding process, it would reveal and leave behind strange crystals of a sort that we had never seen near the surface before, not at that time at the very least. This would change eventually, but at that moment, they became valued not as a building resource, but as a source of nourishment, something to help feed the growing populace of our race. Gravanax would eventually tunnel his way across the subsurface of Soul Valley in the wake of our arrival, and through his power, these Vuros crystals would begin to spontaneously erupt across the surface of the Sandy Valley, seemingly without end. It was this discovery then that would finally lead us into the most recent, current, and possibly last era of the Lamorn, our psychic era. But only because of a few discoveries made that would ultimately spell the end of our kind entirely. You see, at the dawn of this new time period, it became apparent that a bit of a social divide was starting to form amongst our kind, especially as many that had grown to rely on machines for daily and work tasks were now left with little more than manual labor as an option. The Lamorn priests that had served as our rulers, in a sense, were chosen for the positions not on the basis of merit or even that of popularity, but because in less than 1% of all Lamorn that are born, they can be born with a powerful psychic crystal of a sort embedded in their heads that grows with them over time. And with these crystals, the priests could control not just incredible psychic abilities, but even the essence of the elements themselves. Great priests throughout our time would work to use this power for the greater good and for the glory of the Church of the Sacred Tree. The Lamorn priest and sculptor Lakash, for example, was known for his love of solving mathematical equations, and with his own psychic powers, he would discover several equations that could allow him to use the latent psychic power in the very air around us to condense psychic power and form into psychic objects, leading to the design of unique sealing mechanisms and their keys that only those with the power to manipulate psychic energy could use. Shay, the first ever female Lamorn priest, became the first to understand the scientific basis of time and space, and with her power, she led the way to the development of the warp technology that would eventually come to define our people, and the greater technology we would develop in our psychic era. Regardless of one's opinion of them, this did not sit well with all Lamorn, for not all priests were so wonderful or contributed to our race in ways that were either helpful or even wholly appropriate. The priest class knew of this and the rising unrest of Lamorn that struggled to adapt to a world without machine assistance, and understood that something had to be done about it. And so, they sought any way that they could to try and share the power they did have, wishing to give all Lamorn access to the same sort of power, so the growing unrest could be placated, and their class could remain stable and be judged more on their merit and actions, and less on a sense of birthright. Through experimentation, they discovered that the Viros crystals that had been discovered in the Great Mines could be infused with their power to make them beacons of psychic energy, that when surgically fused to the heads of common Lamorn, could allow them to tap into their latent psychic powers and channel psychic energy just as the priests could, albeit to a lesser degree of power. Changes were even made to the Viola in this time, as specialized suits were produced that allowed Lamorn to bond with a specific vehicle of their choosing through a special molded suit, with future advanced models also including heat shielding and the inclusion of the IC mode, allowing them to see themselves in a more personal light and to have a greater sense of independence in their minds and daily lives. Thus, a greater sense of inequality was taken away, and our society could flourish once more in this new psychic era. But, as with any massive civilization and the vast span of its existence, in time, something else would grab the attention of Lamorn. Something that would ultimately spell the seeming end for our kind, and would put us into the state that we currently reside in. And that, in turn, is where my story begins. I was born in the same medical research center that I would eventually spend my working years within to my father, Narsha Vexcavan, and my mother, Shemta Botween, hatched from an egg inside. However, the circumstances of my early life were a bit different compared to what most would have gone through. I by no means really considered myself to be special at that time, but most of the children of the Lamorn would be taken at an early age to learn of the sacred tree and its importance, a separation that usually lasts 5 years. While this sort of life is customary and seen as a healthy experience for growing minds in our culture, my father was not exactly on the Viola there, if that makes sense. Neither of my parents were the kind to be against this, don't get me wrong here, but they could tell that I had a knack for figuring out things with my hands and my mind, possessing a sense of innate curiosity that my father sought to feed and develop. I still got along with other kids and could play with them, but a lot of my time was spent at home in Fury Green, playing with toys and making my own fun out of life. A lot of other families didn't entirely take too kindly to this, but they had other issues to deal with of a more pressing matter. You see, the time of my birth was but a short time removed from the death of the Tsar. Through sheer mental fortitude, willpower, and the grace of the sacred tree, he had his life extended over and over again, presiding over almost all of the known history of the Lamorn. But he was by far an exception to the rule, not the norm, and even with time, he could not live forever. His death was a time of great sorrow for many, so religious instruction was a bit briefer in those times, and my existence at home was given a convenient excuse, I suppose you could say. To further keep eyes off me so I could have a healthier life, my parents thought it would be a wise idea for me to make friends with some of the priestly class and their children, thinking it would add a bit of balance to my life. I didn't exactly care for a lot of them, but there was one that genuinely changed my life, and who would ultimately end up playing a far bigger role in what eventually ensue than any of us could have known at the time. His name was Chetoyant Voloon, but I didn't exactly like the way his name sounded, so I just called him Chetoya as a little nickname, and it seemed to have stuck for more than just myself. Chetoya was a good kid and a good man as a whole. The two of us spent a great deal of time together growing up, and while he was trained to be a Lamorn priest, not just for the sake of his family, but because his innate psychic powers were much greater than what he should have had possession of at his age, I decided to follow my father's lead and instead studied to be a man of science. Prior to our childhood, the Lamorn had built an advanced research facility inside the ice belt on top of the frozen ruins there, and it acted as not just as a hospital for Lamorn seeking to live a more modern life with their physical care, but also for the study of the many native life forms that are present on the planet and even our own kind. I had always been endeared and fascinated with the place ever since I was born, and it was my wish to work there for the entirety of my adult life. And to my credit, I put in the hard work and study needed to make that reality. But as I did so, it was also with an awareness of something else happening at that time. Something else that would bring disaster upon us. While excavating rock material in the region of Flare Pool where the Magdrada volcano was located, workers there started to notice that a lot of life forms in the area seemed to be feeding off of something that was rising through the lava below and around them, a strange green gel that had been filtered and condensed by the strata below the land into a sort of nutritious foodstuff for them. The energy inside was rather inert in a base state, and nothing much could be done with it, but it was eventually discovered that if the material was refined, the source of the energy inside of it could be isolated, creating a powerful energy force we came to simply call green energy. When applied, this energy seemed to be both a panacea and fertilizer of sorts for all sorts of creatures. Not only did its inherent energy properties seem to strengthen the bodies of beasts that ingested it, but it also allowed these creatures to thrive and multiply in massive droves, spreading life across parts of Vuros that had originally otherwise been uninhabitable. Early experiments with it managed to increase the size of Fury Green by an immense degree, creating an immense, lush landscape even greater than anything we'd known before, and we all saw this as a powerful tool that could be used to finally make Vuros a much less hostile land for all. As such, with the help and permission of Fenoros, we built a massive refinement complex inside of the Magdrada volcano, and began to process and refine the green energy gel there to make more of it, testing its capabilities in all fields we could. Agriculture, technology, medicine, nothing was left untouched for the sake of pushing our civilization forward as much as we could. And with us preserving as much of our resources as we also could since the beginning of the Psychic Era, we thought that finally we are reaching towards yet another pinnacle of development. As for myself, I was at least mildly interested in it all, but more so as a tool than anything else. At the same time, however, it wasn't exactly my focus at the time, as we had been setting up a lot of new equipment and devices within the research center, with many of them incorporating the use of psychic power to not only operate, but function at a mechanical level. It certainly made it easier to store and manipulate it all, but we still stuck to some of our more basic technology for simple operations. Just because you can make a place super high-tech doesn't mean you have to, and that's coming from a man that was up and up on the tech as it was. Over the course of the next few years, I worked and completed my residency and degree work at the Icebelt facility and basically lived there. It's not like I really had a choice in the matter, given the isolation of the place and my personal distaste for the cold. Yes, I know it is slightly funny that a man that wasn't a big fan of the cold was now working at a place that was literally swathed in it, but the advances in cryopreservation we were making made it an ideal choice for the work. At the same time though, Chitoya was making a name for himself, and I do mean that in the best way possible, mind you. He had advanced through his psychic training skills and residence work at Fury Green at a breakneck pace, his power and influence becoming seemingly greater by the day. The guy was getting fast-tracked to be a new head for the priest class, and as much as I have to admit that I was a bit jealous of him there, I was also happy for him. The man had a compassionate heart, and really cared for all Lamorn like children, and the feelings were often mutual, with many looking up to him as the one that was truly going to be the next Thessar, in a sense. We had grown a bit apart in those times, and it was natural, with no real bit of feelings to be had there. Our work was at the opposite ends of the future of our kind, but it never got in the way of our friendship. We'd talk on occasion, meeting up usually at his training residency at the Temple of Memory, but it wasn't anything that huge. Honestly, I figured that once we both got to the peak of our fields, we'd likely never see much of each other again. Well, boy was I about as wrong as I possibly could have been there, in both good ways and bad. While the two of us were near the completion of our full status work and residency periods, the engineers at the Flare Pool processing facility had been consulting with Chitoya on something drastic. After a lot of testing and debate, it seems that the higher-ups at both the facility and the temple had decided that it was time to take the green energy they had been processing and experimenting with, and try and actually do something significant with it. They had decided that they were going to try and use it to completely revitalize the desert of Soul Valley to bring it back to its former lush greatness once again. Now, when I heard this idea, I honestly thought that they were nuts. Sure, we had been studying a bit to understand the actual biological effects of it, but trying to apply it in such a massive, broad way was still a bit much for me. But I didn't really have a hell of a lot to say in it, so I sort of just had to watch the telemonders in the research center as they slowly put together and assembled an entire cannon complex for refining, concentrating, and firing literal cannon shells of green energy into the air. They wanted them to be blasted into the air and be spread through the sky like a literal rainstorm, something that rarely was ever seen in Soul Valley anymore to begin with. I figured I was just going to end up watching it all get put together and tested on my own. But soon after construction began, I was instead surprised by a visit that I could have never seen coming. Not long after I finally completed my full residency and was able to act as a full-time researcher at the Icebelt Hospital and Medical Research Center, Chitoya also completed his work and was, as I predicted, elevated to be the highest of priests of the Lamorn, a genuine leader for us all. I attended the coronation ceremony personally, and it was a lovely party to say the least. Well, about as much of one as you can really have for this sort of thing. But again, I was genuinely happy for him, truly. However, a few days later, as I was putting together some papers at the end of my work time, I had a surprise visitor. Chitoya! I was confused as to why he had come all this way out here for any real reason. I figured he'd be way too busy getting settled into his position and taking over ceremonial duties, and he was, and that's why he was here. He told me that he was choosing to try and repair the ruins on the outside of the facility so he could make it into a functioning temple again, a more private one for himself. I was floored. He wanted to have a place here, this close to me. I didn't know what to say at the time. Even with all the pomp and circumstance, he never forgot me. He wanted to be close to me of all people. It was something, to say the least. We managed to get an elevator installed to at least get to what parts of the complex were still somewhat intact, and as I went about my own work, I watched as, under Chitoya's command, the ultra space and a few hallways here and there were slowly but surely repaired, and he was able to make a room of it. Well, as much as one could call it out in the cold, but he didn't seem to mind it. He kept thermal generators around him to at least keep his space warm and toasty. It was genuinely comforting to have him around, but I also will admit here and nowhere else and to no one else that he was a strikingly handsome fellow. I never really thought of it or seemed to really take notice of it before, but he had a sense of elegance to him that other Lamorn just didn't hold a candle to. My colleagues sometimes felt a little awkward around me and him when we were together. I don't think it was Chitoya that was the real problem here. No, I knew it was me. I was a bit too close to him anytime he was among all of us. I listened intently to every single word that came from him, even when it wasn't directly aimed at me. My work always had to come first, but I found myself more and more wishing that it could come second. I felt something there. Something that had been building for a long time, but that I could not express openly at the time, nor had the courage to speak to Chitoya on, fearing it would create conflict in our time together. Even so, having Chitoya close at all made it a lot easier to also handle the issues going on over at Flare Pool. In the time it took for a proper temple room to be reconstructed over here, and for Chitoya to settle into living at the Icebelt like myself, the engineers over at the new Green Energy Refinement and Distribution Facility had gotten the cannon and had been testing it to try and accomplish the goal they had really set forth for it all. But as one might expect, though, there were a lot of hiccups. Refining and then shooting the sky with a cannon shell of semi-purified and concentrated green energy proved to be a harder task to accomplish than they all seemed to think it was going to be at first, and I'm really not at all surprised. It felt like the more purified the substance became, the more dangerous it felt, as if there was a power in it we just weren't taking into account. But the days rolled on, one after another, and even with repeated failures, it felt like they were getting closer and closer to success. Until the day they finally had it. And lost it all at the same time. One day, as Chatoya and I were chatting and watching the telemonitors in the facility's dining area, we saw the last ever test of the Magdrada volcano. The foreman there had informed Chatoya earlier in the day that they had successfully refined a shell's worth of the most refined and concentrated dose of green energy yet, 99% pure, and were ready to finally test it. They finally had a true sense of confidence about it, and knew that this would be the one that would finally bring green life back to Soul Valley, finally bring it back to the pristine grassy landscape it had once been in the ancient era. Or at the very least would hopefully be the start towards it. We both watched on bated breath as we saw the cannon shell get fired from the volcano, fly high into the sky, and then ignited. The resulting burst was brighter and more powerful than any we had ever seen before. We could literally see the green energy raining down upon the land like a thick green storm and mist, a proper green energy shower that covered the entire land, not just Soul Valley, but everything and everyone everywhere. We waited in the hopes of seeing life spring forth everywhere in bountiful waves. And what we witnessed was a complete horror show. There was no outpour of fresh life in Soul Valley. No, only something far, far worse. The few beasts that managed to make a life out there were made stronger, sure, but our people, those that were directly exposed to this green energy that also had artificial psychic crystals embedded into their bodies, they ceased being themselves, cries of pain ringing out as the last intelligent thought, before their bodies changed, grew larger, stronger, monstrous. They fell to the ground on all limbs, transfigured into snarling, ravenous monsters. The next thing we knew, they were attacking any and all Lamorn around them that had been sheltered at the time, the telemonitors filled with the sounds and sights of violence and horror, the sounds of screams, dismemberment, the devouring of bodies, the last gasps of life. In just the span of a few minutes, the entire world we had known was thrown into terror. We had witnessed what we would come to call the Great Tragedy, and as Chatoya and myself sat in that dining room together, watching this all unfold, we knew that dark days were ahead of us. Ahead of all of us. It took a few days for us to get the full, true assessment of what had happened, and the event chilled us to the bone. The Lamorn that had been changed were nothing like their former selves in any way whatsoever. No, merely monsters that ran on little more than intelligent instinct, so much so that we could not even call them Lamorn anymore. And so, in Chatoya's own words, we called them grievers, for that is how we initially responded to them, with grief. Lamorn that had been saved from the transformation that could make it were transported here to the Icebelt, as many as we could get here, but even then, their safety was not guaranteed. Grievers had emerged from those that had been working outside the time as well, and it took our strongest fighters to ward them off. Many hesitated because they may have known the ones they were fighting, friends, family, or something more, but they quickly learned that they were not themselves anymore, and that these monsters had to be dealt with, even if I myself could hardly bring forth the emotions needed to take it. Chatoya remotely convened with the other priests elsewhere, as I did my best to keep to my normal work and all the additional work that came with keeping people alive and safe. Chatoya and the other priests tried to reason with the grievers, to find any potential way to bring sense to them again through words and actions, and nothing succeeded. We did not wish it, but we were forced in defense to use many of the robots we had made to help our kind, the Cybots and maintenance tanks especially, modifying them to be able to seek out and attack any and all grievers that tried to shut down our machinery and the mechanical defenses that are being used to hold them off, to fight back in desperation. Plans were drawn up to build new robots that were specifically designed to combat these entities, to have no other purpose but to hunt them down and kill them for the sake of our own safety. But Chitoya kept flip-flopping on the issue, commissioning these machines to be made, only to then cancel the projects even after functional prototypes had been made. Not even just that, but they had effectively already been deployed, just awaiting full commands in stasis. The strain on him was incredible, and I always feared that the pain would cause him to turn away, to focus only on himself and his own thoughts as he tried to figure out what to do. The kind of isolation that leaves lasting damage on the heart and mind of a soul. This was way too much for him, still so young and inexperienced, like myself, and I just wanted the best for him. Instead of turning away though, he grew closer to me in those days, as we talked on many topics. A lot of it was geared towards just trying not to stress out over everything going on, even though I knew that was very difficult for him. But it also had a lot of lighter moments for the both of us. We reminisced about better times, all the times that we had shared and experienced up to that point. The two of us talked so often that it felt almost bearable. Almost. But it was not to last. Eventually, having run out of all completely non-harmful options, one day Chitoya came to me with an idea. If they could do little more than hold back the grievers for the moment, then perhaps it was time to finally look into the beasts themselves and examine the overall anatomy to find out what was going on with them in the first place. What truly made them different from us in form, inside and out. If green energy was what had changed them in the first place, then maybe it could be used to force them back. Use the immense power of the most refined concentrations of it we can get a hold of to force their bodies to change back to what they once were. It was a long shot to be sure, but with options truly running out, I agreed to help him with this. Though I lacked the seniority to really be leading this project, it was mine to make, and so I took up the mantle for him. Together in that moment, I thought that maybe we stood a chance of saving our people after all. On Chitoya's end remotely, he would convene telepathically with the other Lamorn priests across Vuros. We had come to see that the priest class had been totally unaffected by the great tragedy, even those that had been directly exposed to the green energy shower outside. It seems that the natural psychic crystals they had been born with were unaffected by green energy, pointing then towards the Vuros crystals as being the source of this terrible event. Tests done by the priest confirmed this, as we found that Vuros crystals could also be energized and used as a vessel for storing green energy. The exposure to such a refined source of green energy must have flooded the psychic crystals and overloaded them, and given that they would eventually find a way to process green energy crystals into pure psychic energy, that assumption was proven to be fact. The group convened and looked again at the prophecy of old that had otherwise nearly been forgotten and sought its presence once more. If the time of the prophecy of the ancient era had not been meant for then it must have been meant for now, they hoped. A chosen one of their people then must one day arise to fight back and save the grievers from themselves, they wagered at least, and Chitoya made swift action to prepare the way for this savior. The priest Tahrgun, inventor of the mote-operated psychic lock, was asked to take great care to develop and scatter the most powerful weaponized aspects of the Lamorn elements and to build shrines for them in Soul Valley. They were only meant for the one that had the power to use them to their fullest and not squander the gifts, and with them they also gathered and left massive troves of green energy crystals, all to help give them the power they would need to harness the elemental might to the fullest. Lamorn of all classes and locals paid tribute and left vases and urns filled with materials that could be of use for the Chosen One. All the while, with limited resources that we had available at the Ice Belt, Chitoya directed that his personal room be altered into one that would hold an incredible relic that the Chosen One would need to access all of these shrines, and much more. I know that he wanted to prepare the way for this savior they envisioned, but what good would it do for us now? If this is a savior in the future, Were the efforts of everyone else in the present meaningless? I wanted to be angry, but I knew my old friend was doing this with panic hidden under his breath. He needed to keep his faith in it all, but had wavered in private with me. I could see the pain and the strain on him from it all. I knew he was doing his best, but felt powerless all the same. I just wanted to leave the lab and feel the warmth of the sun on me again. We both did. On my end of it all, I helped direct the use of our cryostasis pods for a new purpose entirely. We did not wish to harm our brethren, beasts now or not, so we would have brave volunteers enter into the field outside the facility and do their best to capture any stray grievers we could find and force them into the cryopods to settle them and freeze them for examination. After the first few days, specimens were being transported into the facility on an almost daily basis. The pods put them into a cold hibernation and maintained minimal life functions on them, making it possible to put them into a deep enough sleep that we could experiment on them cleanly and carefully without doing true harm. Keeping the cooling equipment for the entire line operational became utterly essential for all of us, so the system was modified so it could run on the wind power that was already being used to help keep the generators running. So even if the generators shut down and the major power systems here failed, they could still keep working and keep their contained specimens frozen and alive. In turn, constantly inspecting and repairing any damaged cryopods became a top priority for all of us. But as for my studies with the use of green energy, no, those proved to be a total bust as well. No matter how we concentrated or delivered it into the griever, the results were always the same. A rapid increase in cellular division speed and doubling of the number of cells, leading to increased growth and greater physical vitality. The effects were always the same, and they were always so terrible and drastic. The supplies that we needed to keep the facility running had become a constant nagging thought in my head, a thing that I could find little peace from. Worse yet, because of how it affected the vitality and metabolism of the grievers, we could not experiment with and study them while they were in stasis. We had to wake them up to put their bodies into a normal resting state, so sedation became a panicked obsession that cost a few of us over the long days that seemed to follow without end. And what initially perplexed me more so than anything else was that we just couldn't find anything wrong with them. We checked their cells and DNA over and over, and in all of our regeneration experiments, we could not find any chromosomal anomalies or other mutations in them under any circumstances. It was as if we were the same exact species. But that just couldn't be true. If they were once us, they were not anymore, but why? The days grew long and hard, but that was just a bloody given at that point. I could go on and on about people losing their sanity, the panic attacks. Even as I had to leave my notes in the lab spaces with a clinical sense of politeness, it was a farce. I suppose I hoped that would make it seem as if we had it together still, that we still stuck to our work and were able to persevere with a calm and focused disposition. Yeah, no. I will be honest. Fear was the biggest presence in the labs then. Fear of so many things that I could hardly count at all. But persevere we still did, even if progress felt non-existent for too long. However, after what felt like eternity just running around in circles, not knowing what I was even dealing with, we had a breakthrough. Finally, something! This whole time, we had always assumed that something in the Viros crystals was causing alterations to the green energy inside that would then lead to mutation, but given that we couldn't find any mutations, it felt like we were just going in circles with it. But as I observed one specimen on a colder than normal day and looked to its brain activity, I saw that the stimulation of applied green energy was activating a region of the brain that we had never even looked into before. The alteration in activity was altering the genes inside of them, turning on and off genes in a way that unlocked an entirely different form for our kind, the Grievers. In a way that meant that we possibly could halt and reverse all of it. If we could apply green energy for stimulation and simultaneously turn the targeted genes off the moment that cell multiplication occurred, We could trick the entire operation into proliferating the active genes that make us, the Lamorn, and peel back those that make the Grievers. I thought that finally, I had something of value. But it led to a brick wall that confounded me to the absolute utmost. The good news, if there really was any to it, is that we managed to get it to work to some degree. But every single time we did, and it seemed like we were finally about to make progress, halfway through, something violent would be triggered in their bodies, and they would revert with such ferocity that we had to forcefully sedate the subjects entirely into stasis again to keep them from harming anyone. Multiple subjects were coming in every day, and we were almost full to capacity on cryopods. And on the other hand, every now and then, someone sent out to help wouldn't come back. I saw people I considered to be friends and colleagues vanish, one by one. And worst of all, even as I pressed forward, even as we started to run low on the resources we needed to even perform our experiments, even as so many others gave in to resignation, that our efforts were for naught, and that we needed to stop, I kept going. Even as all of this happened, and even as Chitoya had to leave. He saw the signs too, and knew that he had to do something to protect those left. He left in duty, not in pain, but he told me it was for something for both of us. He could not say what, but left he nonetheless did, leaving me all on my own. Again. The following weeks were even more incredibly hard, and that is putting it about as mildly as I think I possibly can. Our numbers continued to dwindle bit by bit. Personnel became increasingly scarce, and I found myself in the company of fewer and fewer people as all of this kept going on. I felt alone. Sure, I was clearly far from that, but the ones that were still left working with me clearly didn't feel like they were going to get out of this alive. And I could not blame them in their fear, not for a moment. I longed for those days once more. The days where the place felt alive, where others were alive, where Chitoya and I could still have time together. Time to talk, to care, to I suppose it would be hard to hide those thoughts here now. Not that it mattered anymore. I could feel the spirit of morale in every sense breaking. I knew our days were numbered. It was merely a matter of time. It wasn't just the Icebell facility that was in great danger there, far from it. Across the lands we had colonized, things had been going terribly, and we all felt the worst of it in our hearts. But hope was not entirely gone just yet. In the middle of Soul Valley, the few Lamorn that could still fight off the attacks of the Grievers had been building something that was supposed to help protect those of us that were left. It was a structure that they called Chrono Tower. It was not only meant to be a monument to the Lamorn and our legacy, but also a burial tower, a mausoleum, a place where we could at least bury the loved ones that we still had the bodies of, and let the cybots and other machines built to help them in life protect them in death. It was a poignant monument, to say the least, and I understood why it was being made. Initially, though, its existence filled me with dread and pain, and I could hardly contain it all. Day by day, our resources were dwindling more and more. Our experiments yielded no further information, no further sense of hope for our chances of actually getting the job done. I couldn't admit defeat. I couldn't. I didn't want to. But I was eventually left with absolutely no choice. The day finally came. We ran out of resources, and soon enough, the generators for the facility finally stopped. Low power mode would be initiated to at least keep the cryopods and some minor systems operational, but the majority of it all was likely to freeze over. With many others, including the foreman of the facility at Flarepool, in despair and defeat, and under Chitoya's request, I joined the survivors that could make the pilgrimage over to Chrono Tower. I had done so much. We had come so far. And yet, none of it mattered. I joined the huddled masses that feared it all, as Chitoya returned from one final pilgrimage, and the priests that were left convened together with him one final time. I had hoped that my parents at the very least would have been there, that the family I had worked to make proud, that had steered me down this path were there as well, waiting for me. But only my mother was there. I had to learn in the worst moment possible that my father, the man that had insisted on the life I came to live and love, had been attacked and killed by a griever on the way out of Fury Green. My heart hung as heavy as it possibly could have. Chitoya's own family had suffered a similar fate in private, and to hear it from my mother made it all the more taxing on myself and everyone else around us. We were losing everything and everyone, and in this tower, even with a protective force field in place that could keep out the grievers and prevent them from desecrating the site, it was a tomb in and of itself. There was nowhere left for us to go, nowhere else to want to pin our hopes upon. I did not dare to bother Chitoya and the other priests at first, wanting to be respectful and merely wished for the best. But in one instance I overheard something that made me angry at him and so many of the other priests, an admittance that I had no choice but to eventually confront Chitoya about. They were wrong. They got the prophecy wrong. This entire time, they had been hoping and waiting for the Chosen One to finally emerge from our kind, but in the end, they forced themselves to look through the prophecy once more to see what they could have possibly missed, and they missed something pretty damn important. They finally deduced that, while they had been right in predicting many aspects of the prophecy, they had been terribly wrong in one aspect. The Chosen One would come to them from outside. Outside our entire world, outside our own universe. From a realm that could be near, could be far, but in all sense, was totally inaccessible to us otherwise. They would have to try and find our savior in another universe altogether. And so the boldest of plans was put forth. While I had very little use for our teleportation technology, it was hard to escape it in daily life. Using all the limited resources we truly had left, the last of the Lamorn priests crafted extremely powerful portable teleporters that could be used to transfer their bodies in essence across the layers of reality that we were sandwiched into, as well as a master teleporter in the pinnacle of Chrono Tower that was meant to take the Chosen One back to the place of origin, for only the master teleporter was strong enough to precisely teleport others to another world with proper coordinates. I wanted desperately for us to be able to use it, but the priests had the right idea. We could not use it for fear of ending up on a world where we might perish regardless, for we knew no other habitable world aside from Vuros, and Chitoya had already entrusted the 5 keys needed to operate it with the guardians of our planet on his way to Chrono Tower, so there was no going back. 12 of the remaining 13 priests took what supplies they could with them, and with a portable teleporter each, left this land in search of the Chosen One. With them lay the last hope we had of finding our prophesied savior. And left behind the last of the priests, the one meant to guard the master teleporter. The only one at home that could not just pierce through the layers of reality, but actually be used to travel to specific locations with the right coordinates. The last of them all, here, was Chitoya. A few days after the 12 others were sent out, I chose to sit down and talk to Chitoya about everything. I was upset to hear that his own parents had been attacked by grievers and other beasts on the way to the tower. Damaged beyond saving, now lost too, with the lives of so many souls now. I could feel the weight on his shoulders, the crushing pressure of it all. I lamented in kind about the loss of my research and all the progress we had made. Where once in the face of grief we chatted about happy things, trying to make ourselves feel better in the desire that maybe something could actually get through, now the two of us sat there, scared out of our minds and hearts. Chitoya had his faith though, and for him, that and his hope is what led him to still keep going, every day that he possibly could, hoping and praying that someone would come back, that someone would bring the chosen one that we had sought now for so long. Some days were better than others, admittedly. One day he would sound and feel like his friendly, pious self, and then others he sounded and felt more like me. Defeated, distraught, terrified. But those days were the ones where he chose to only speak to me. The days we just spent alone, together. I think by that point, we both sort of just knew why that was the case. It was truly something completely and utterly unspoken. Not out of shame, but simply because there were far greater priorities at play, and I never once felt offended or hurt by it. It was enough to have him by my side, truly. Together we laid in pain and torment, even as he did his best and tried his best to make me feel faith, hope, whatever it took to keep us moving forward still. Time was not kind to us, sadly, like the rest of Vuros, and as one could have predicted in any real scenario, our food supplies could only last for so long as well. The last of the Lamorn here in Chrono Tower started to die. One by one, time would take its toll, and as they died, they were given the best funeral procession we could muster, and laid to rest inside of the tower. I wept for all of them, the most for my own mother, being barely able to handle that loss, and every mounting one to come before and after, and slowly but surely our numbers dwindled. It helped to space out the funerals, but that is barely anything close to a positive note on any of this. All that we had sought for in living on, and soon there were barely any of us left at all. With so much free time available now for, well, whatever there even was left to do with our time, I thought back to how this crisis all started. Green energy. In so many ways it had proven to be something with so much promise in so many damn fields, and yet when combined with the wrong materials, it could only cause pain, panic, the destruction of our society and our people. It ruined it all, and all because we did not think of the true consequences of using it without understanding how it could affect us all. And in thinking on it so much, it finally dawned on me, why is it that this energy was only something that we knew of? What of the Lamorn of the ancient era? Sure, even if it was something to only see in Soul Valley, this energy source had to be there, did it not? Was it not something that was inherently a part of Vuros, or the poison? The poison that had transformed Carvex, and that likely may have affected other forms of life. Could it be? Was that poison green energy? If it was, then the prophecy of old didn't come to never pass. We were living it! The one spoken of in ancient times, and the one that we now sought. Could they indeed be one and the same? It had so much time to seep into the planet, to become a part of it from such an ancient era of our race. But, even if that was the case, I could not test it. I could not prove it. I knew that it would do nothing to help the present situation, and I did not wish to make it all any harder on Chitoya. My dear, dear Chitoya. My days are coming to a close, truly and ultimately. The 12 that had been sent out never returned. No, they never, ever came back. As Chitoya and I sat alone together, now the last 2 left, I could mourn no longer. Too many tears, too many lost souls. All of it just became too much for me. Overwhelming. as I sat at the top of the tower with him on this day, the day from which I am speaking now. I melted into his embrace. I remember the times we had together as children, as friends, as whatever we were here and now. I could almost feel nothing but the love I had for him and hope. At the end, I once again, with him, have found hope. I am Tahrgun Vixkavan. Hear my words, anyone who finds this message, and know that I have hope for Chatoyant Vulun, and the chosen one he so strongly believes will come to meet him one day. I do not think I will see it with him, but I will remain here in Chrono Tower and with Chatoya eternally. We've heard our share of stories here, and honestly, we don't know what to entirely make of this. But the pain and sorrow in those words more than makes me weep for the disaster that seems to have unfolded for this man and all those he may have known. And we could leave it at that, but we made a decision as a crew, and we're not just going to take this sad story and leave it as just a story. We managed to lock on to another edge to the dimensional rift we received this message from, and in our exploration, we found an interesting artifact hidden on a world that we'd never even known about. After extensive studying, we know now that it is a teleporter, just like that found on Tanamar in the past, and we're ready to use it. So tune in for our next transmission, as we'll be broadcasting it right from the field. That's right, buckle up viewers, because we are going to Vuros. Thank you all for watching this video. We here at Space Pirate Science Team take our work very seriously, and we genuinely wish to be as informative as possible when it comes to the work we conduct here, for both ourselves and in the name of science. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and comment to help us get greater recognition out there to inform the greater populace of the universe as a whole. Also, feel free to keep track of us through Twitter, as we'll be posting notices there every time something new is submitted for your viewing pleasure. We hope to see you all in the next video, no matter what world it may take us to.